I'm an architect. I have a small firm that mostly works on mission-driven projects with nonprofit clients. And as such, we have worked on many affordable housing projects, supportive housing projects in various neighborhoods around various cities. And every time we do, literally every time, people come up to us personally, or they'll say something at a public meeting, something to the effect that,
tell me if they cry.
Affordable housing. I want to help people as much as possible. I give money all the time. It's just that in this situation, in this neighborhood, right now, it just doesn't work. It won't work here. And what about the children? And I'm always fascinated by that line. What about the children? It's literally been said to me dozens of times. Because, right, what about their children? And what about exclusion is good for your children? Shouldn't we want to have empathy for others? Shouldn't we want dynamic communities? Shouldn't we want folks to be encouraged to move up the economic ladder? It seems to me that generally, we should all want to make all of our cities and neighborhoods more accommodating to well thought out and dispersed housing for everyone. And this is going to help create a more stable, a safer, and a happier country in the long run. I was at a lecture recently where the speaker, another architect, said that single-family zoning, that's the process where a city sets aside a certain section of the city for only single-family houses, that single-family zoning should essentially be considered criminal at this point. Now, that sounds a little harsh, but if you slow down and you think about it a little bit, you can understand what they meant. In these neighborhoods, we have lots and lots of infrastructure. We've got roads and buses and utilities, et cetera, for surprisingly few people. And in our economic situation now, shouldn't we be better caretakers of our economic infrastructure and try to get a better bang for our buck? You might say, well, great, just put new houses farther away. But every time we build out areas farther out of town, we also have to build out all the roads and the highways, the buses and the trains, the schools, the libraries, the water mains, the utility lines. All of that takes energy, takes resources, takes money. We have plenty of infrastructure now. We're just underusing it. Now, density scares people, but it is the only logical way to have a more reasonable cost curve for the expensive art of building a city. So we're in a situation that more and more communities, our friends and neighbors, and people that could be our friends and neighbors, cannot find affordable housing. The market presses forward with what is easy to sell, which is reasonable, you can understand. So there may be many housing units on the market at any one time, but does that mean that a teacher can buy one? Or a single mother? Or someone who has a disability that makes it difficult to hold a steady job, which, by the way, is any one of us if we had a car accident or any number of possibilities? What about a firefighter or a social worker? Should they not get housing? Does everyone need to work for Google? So, long story short, we have massive needs for affordable housing units in stable, mixed neighborhoods that use the infrastructure smartly. But an economic system that tends to help those that don't need the help and actually hinder those that are desperate for it. Meanwhile, as anyone who has been to a public meeting recently knows, our public discourse is filled with folks fighting desperately against building smart, well-run, affordable housing in all neighborhoods. And why? Well, there's many reasons why. But one of them is a sort of demonization of those poorer people and how they might hurt the protective layer around my big investment, which is my house. People will often say, poor folks are not all bad people, implying that many are. And they're right.
Yeah, because then I'll be less stressed out. I have a ladder on the horse. That is a lot.
There are also loads of bad people who are wealthy, and lots of bad people who are middle class.
You know, I drink a lot of water.
But there are lots and lots of really great people who are poor, wealthy, middle class. Does it really seem likely that the wealth of somebody living on your block is going to be the driving force of whether they're a good neighbor or not? My guess is everybody in this room is right now picturing that person who drives a super fancy car but never shovels their walk, right? Now, we're not going to answer all the economic underpinnings. We're not going to answer all the economic underpinnings of the entire U.S. economy in the next couple of minutes. And frankly, I wouldn't even know where to start. I'm just painting this picture as a background to a different discussion. Here, in a time of relative economic safety, we are having a hard time getting enough people to have enough empathy to get behind providing what is clearly needed housing. Okay, so now I'm going to take that issue, and I'm going to put it aside for a moment. We're going to change the subject, and then we're going to circle back, and we'll come back to it. So let's take a second now, and we're going to talk climate crisis. As a society, we are behind the 8 ball. The fastest anyone can imagine responding to the climate crisis in any meaningful way is years off. Yet, calamities will soon start in earnest. It's not whether the exact science is right. I'm sure it's not. In fact, I can guarantee it's not perfect because it's just too complicated. But that means it may be worse, not necessarily better. And the binary of belief and do not believe is just simplistic and unhelpful and often kind of absurd and wasting of time. What needs to happen, what must happen, is we as a country must join together with the vast majority of other countries and shape a new world of energy not based on fossil fuels and plastics, but instead on local, logical, and appropriate technologies. Sure, right? That's likely to happen. I mean, do you really think we're going to band together with a bunch of other nations and actually make meaningful changes, not just pledges, but meaningful changes in the next year, next 5 years? It seems just unlikely. We're not going to do that until we're absolutely forced into it. It's just our human nature. So what then do we do? Well, I'm sorry to be the bearer of this, but the bad news is it's too late. We can't stop it. We can't put an end to the climate change coming at this point. It's coming. It's coming too fast. We can't or we won't do enough to make that happen. The good news, well, sort of good news, is that at least probably all of us will probably survive. So there's some good news for you. But it's going to be extremely difficult. Okay, the other good news is that in this process, we have opportunities for reshaping our economics and our sense of shared community for the better. So how do we move forward? Well, A, we do what we can and keep fighting for the change that we need to make. B, we must stop voting for someone else to do something and instead vote for ourselves to assume some of the sacrifice. And C, we need to be prepared for what is to come, because it is coming. Imagine a world where there are climate refugees. Sooner or later, there will be many folks from around the country whose homes and livelihoods are disappearing, and they will need somewhere to go. Action will need to be taken. We don't need to become monks, but we do need to make some changes to our lives, our homes, our work, our commutes, and probably most importantly, to how we treat each other. I have a way of thinking about these issues that I use to help keep myself on track and to make sure I'm not wasting anybody's time. And it's what I call my own little version of the rule of 3. So rule 1, does the proposal help us right now, financially and usefully? Because if it doesn't, nobody's getting on board. Number 2, is it likely to make our lives more flexible and useful in the future if and when things get worse? And they're going to get worse. So whatever the idea is, it not only has to be useful right now, but it has to help us with keeping future options open when the times get tough. And 3, is it providing a level of hopefulness and empathy to others? Thereby, we can all see ourselves in the mirror of our community. If it's not for everyone, We're just building in conflict and defeat in the future. We were talking earlier about how the current economic societal choices have led us to a lack of empathy for our current neighbors who need some sort of help finding stable and reasonable, affordable housing. And that's right now, while things are still economically pretty good. What do you think it will be like when entire communities along our coasts are cleared out and those folks are looking for somewhere to live? Or what about fire refugees, or drought refugees, or hurricane refugees? We can barely handle the rancor and polemics now when there is no major crisis and there is no new influx of people into our communities. So I have a relatively modest proposal to help mitigate current issues, break open opportunities and options for the future, and make our cities more welcoming, and importantly, just to get started, get us going. There are many ways to build successful affordable housing. Big housing blocks, mixed senior housing, infill housing on city-owned lots, developer-driven, state-funded, individual grants, land giveaways, new unitized construction technologies. And I say, yes, and let's do them all. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. Keep trying different approaches, and we will get lots of successful examples and probably a few less successful ones. But we need to keep pushing forward on all those fronts. But one idea I would like to suggest is that we should be encouraging accessory dwelling units. Now, right now, you hear people decrying against new density and wanting to keep the status quo. But as we have said, that is just not a reasonable position given the needs to come and the economic realities of the cost of our infrastructure. Imagine if we could do what we need at low or even no cost to the taxpayer by allowing anyone with a home that has a garage or a backyard space to be able to turn that space into a coach house, or what is referred to as an accessory dwelling unit. You could greatly increase local density without too much change to the character of the neighborhood, which would hopefully soothe some of the potential rancor and help get buy-in from that local community. It could be a moneymaker for the individual homeowner that would usefully counterbalance some of the economic distress from climate and other issues. It would require minimal oversight, as the construction would be simple and small scale and spread out over time. It would also allow for a slow churn of individual investment instead of disruptive large-scale changes. It would provide potentially a mix of incomes on any given block, making neighborhoods more interesting and vital, and importantly, providing enough density to make restaurants and stores and other amenities more viable. It could provide a wide range of economic changes over the lifespan of a house's ownership, such as a place for a nanny to live when the kids are little, or extra income when the kids are off at college, or somebody to help an elderly parent, or a place to have a side gig, just to have some more money coming in. You could just make it a blanket statement across the board so that every homeowner could just start this process at any time. Or we could tie it to areas near public transportation, a transit-oriented design, if you will, to help discourage car use, which would also have an impact. Or we could tie it to housing subsidies like Section 8 housing or something like that. And that way, every time we'd give an amenity to a homeowner, we would also be giving amenities to the cities by helping create a continuous new influx of housing for vulnerable people in small scale and neighborly units. No matter what way we do this, highly controlled or just open the floodgates, it is bound to make a significant impact on the available housing market, widening options, providing needed balancing income for homeowners, and providing for flexibility in the future and making for a more widely open and accommodating and neighborly community for us all. Think about cities like Chicago, Kansas City, Sacramento, Hartford, Cleveland. We're talking about potentially hundreds of thousands of units. So first, we have to get rid of our ridiculous worries over affordable housing moving into our neighborhoods. This is a civic issue, it's a moral issue, it's an issue of economic rationality, but it is also a climate issue. There will literally be millions of people moving around due to these changes. Where do you think they're going to go? They are us, they are part of our neighborhoods. They're going to be a part of our neighborhoods, and they are going to be part of our cities. What else could possibly make sense? We have met the enemy, and it is us. We must stop seeing these sorts of changes as challenging our traditions and start seeing them as stepping stones to a necessarily more accommodating and economic reality. Thank you.